Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, welcome to the coolest place to get your MBA. We are diving into session 4 today of the highly anticipated, highly reviewed Ethicsverse MBA series. We're going to be talking about the revenue engine. Couple of things to get started. I would love for you to drop in the chat where you're coming from. I'm your favorite professor for the day, and there will be homework if I don't get responses here, okay? So I'm by myself, so blast me with emojis, of course. Thank you very much. Love you all. Tell me where you're coming from and tell me any takeaways that you've had from the first 3 sessions that have really resonated or that have really helped your program. A couple of quick announcements. This, of course, is available for credits with SHRM, CCB, and HRCI. We're giving away my good friend Reed Blackman's book. He's coming to Ethicsverse Day on July 23rd, so that should be circled on your calendar. We're going to talk some more about that in a second, but we're going to be giving away 3 copies for the his new book, The Ethical Nightmare Challenge, which I can't say enough about. If you have not downloaded our benchmark report, you absolutely should do that. Your intake channels, your case management, your investigation operation is such a critical intersection point with the stakeholders in your organization, who you rely upon not only to provide risk intelligence so you can do your job, but also who you rely upon to build and be a part of this culture of integrity that we're all trying to build. So if you're not optimizing this, you should be. And if you have not downloaded the benchmark report, it's worth downloading and perusing through. At least while we're speaking here. We have put out this brand new tool, free, because we love you, on the Ethico website that allows you to see which policies you should have. So you can put in a little bit of information about your company, its size, its industry, stuff like that. And it's going to give you a whole list of policies that you should have, highly recommended ones, urgent ones, whatever. And there's templates that you can download to get started. So it's a great platform. It's a great tool that you can utilize to enhance your policy program. And we have a brand new tool that's out called Policy Plus, which is getting rave reviews. Anytime you build something in the compliance software space, you're always kind of crossing your fingers, and by you, I mean me, always crossing our fingers to see, like, is this going to resonate? Did we take enough input from people to kind of solve this problem? And the responses we've been getting have been overwhelming and a resounding double thumbs up. So if you are sorting through policies in a manual way, or you feel like your wheels are spinning, or you can't find evidence, or it's taking 8 weeks to launch a policy, you should take a look at Policy Plus. It is AI driven, gives you all of the analytics you need, AI drafting of policies. You can do all the approvals in it, automatic translations and things like that. So Policy Plus is going to be your new policy pal, okay? And speaking of pals, Ethicsverse Day 2026 is coming up on July 23rd. So everyone's cheering. I love it. If you liked Ethicsverse Day last year, you're going to get your socks knocked off this year. We have 4 phenomenal sessions. We have a bunch of great speakers. We have my good friend Dan Ariely coming to talk about behavioral science. He's one of my favorite authors. He wrote Predictably Irrational and several other books that I love. We're going to have a great AI debate, so hopefully that'll be a little bit spicy and some people's toes might get stepped on. We're talking with some DOJ insiders to really get our minds into the perspective of regulators. And finally, the great women in compliance are coming to answer all your questions. We've got a bunch of questions submitted. If you have some questions you'd like us to ask them, drop those in the chat as well. And I really hope we can blow, last year we set a world record for the biggest ethics and compliance event ever. We want to double that this year. So if you have friends, you have people on your team, I encourage and challenge everyone to at least invite a neighbor. Maybe your neighbor's a plumber. Ethics is for everybody. So let's really blow the doors off and build this community some more. So drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat. As you can see, I'm back in my bow tie. I am your favorite professor, as I keep saying, and we are going to dive in today about talking about the ever important, maybe most important aspect. This might be the most important session that we cover during the Ethicsverse MBA. We're going to be talking about the revenue engine. And I think when we can better understand what's driving sales, what's driving the marketing department, we're going to be able to uncover risks to be more active and be more impactful. Remember, work is going to fill the available time. Your resources are likely limited. The budget that you are allotted is probably not as big as you'd like. So the game becomes really making better bets with our time and directing our efforts towards the things that are going to have the biggest impact, i.e. the biggest, hotspots in our organization. So we are doing 6 sessions in this sort of first course of the Ethicsverse MBA. We first talked about understanding the business that you're in. The second session, we were talking about the how to better speak the financial language of the business. Last session, which people seem to freaking love, which I love it. If you've missed any of these sessions, they're all on our YouTube channel. And like and subscribe, of course. Last session, we were talking about strategy, how to better connect ethics in compliance to the strategy and to the business objectives. Today, we're going to be talking about navigating the revenue engine, sales and marketing. Next one, we're going to talk about ops and technology. And finally, we're going to end with leading with influence, culture, and business metrics. So let's get going here. So think about this kind of a scenario. Your top salesperson just closed a massive deal. You get flagged you flagged that the customer is high risk. The CEO asks you to sort it out. What do you do? So this scenario plays out in a lot of organizations all the time. We're working on launching a new third-party risk management platform. And the stories that we've heard across all these different folks that have been part of the beta and all these people that we've been talking to speaks to the fact that we need to, of course, de-risk the organization. Business wants to run forward fast. Many times we end up kind of getting the short end of the stick or getting the brunt of that. So this kind of scenario is playing out all the time. And the way that we end up sorting it out really kind of ends up depending the extent to which we actually understand the sales organization, sales, marketing, stuff like that, versus just kind of sitting on the sidelines trying to kind of regulate it, okay? So I want to start out by talking about how the sales organization works by diving into the infrastructure of revenue. As always with this thing, I'm going to talk fast so you can slow it down on YouTube, okay? We got a lot of slides to get through. We have a big case study at the end that kind of brings all these things together. And so some of this stuff is going to be very basic. You may already know all these things, but we're going to move quickly, and hopefully you learned something today. We're already up to 1,000 emojis. This is a home run already, okay? So sales 101. So these are a couple of terms that you're going to hear within a sales organization. Quotas. This is how much revenue each salesperson is meant to generate. Territories. This is the geographic or maybe ICP. When I talk about ICP, that's ideal client profile. What are the types of the customers that a salesperson is able to go after? Sales cycle. This is how long does it take from a sale to close, right? The sales cycle of a tank of gas takes about 5 minutes. The sales cycle for buying a house or selling a house, maybe that's 3 months, maybe that's 2 months, whatever. Your sales pipeline. This is what the salespeople are looking at every day. This is what their managers are looking at to see, well, what are the deals in play right now, and the pipeline kind of describes the various different stages going from maybe that initial meeting onto that negotiation and that close at the bottom end of the funnel. So this is the mix of prospects at various stages. And then the win rate. This is what sales management is always looking at. This is what executives are always looking at. Marketing is looking at to say, okay, how many people come in our funnel, right? A bunch of water comes in the funnel and then it goes through this funnel and then some of it drips out the bottom. What percentage of the people that we're getting in front of are actually turning into closed sales? So these are the things, this is the language that your sales team is talking about in all of their one-on-ones and all their team meetings and things like that. So let's think about this sales funnel, right? A bunch of people maybe go to your website. A few, some of them end up wanting to see your product. Some of them end up getting a quote, and then some of them end up turning into customers, right? Like that funnel goes down like this, and some proportion kind of advances to those various different stages. So I think it's important if we're going to get into the mind of the salespeople who originate a lot of risk, or a lot of risk lives in the sales department, if we need to understand not only this language, this vocabulary, but we also need to understand where the risk might live in the sales funnel. So prospecting is the top layer. So this is where your data privacy risks live. The do not call list violations, misleading outreach from marketing, making claims that maybe don't exist. That's kind of in the top of the funnel, right? Maybe up even above the funnel as there's these claims being made to the marketplace. In the qualification stage, okay, each one of these is sort of moving down the funnel, of course, okay? So the qualification stage, this is where we might see some sanction screenings gaps, some know your customer gaps, shortcuts that might be taken under pressure because a salesperson has to meet that quota, or they have to get their win rate up, or they're got to pay their mortgage or whatever, right? There's a lot of perverse incentives that can exist with a salesperson relative to the standards that are set by the broader organization. At the proposal stage, and listen, I'm not just talking about regulatory risk here. I'm just talking about risk to the business. We care about risk. We want to de-risk our organization, right? Risk is just volatility in any kind of a system. And so risk can, of course, come from us taking a bribe or somebody in the organization taking a bribe and us, getting on the headlines of an of like a newspaper. Another risk can come from just havoc that is, wreaked or whatever across the organization downstream from decisions that are made during the sales process. So sometimes inaccurate claims can be made during the proposal stage. Sometimes unapproved terms can create legal risk if a salesperson or a sales leader is just trying to ram something through. And sometimes there can be some anti-bribery exposure at the proposal stage. During the negotiation stage, again, we're getting lower and lower in the funnel here. Side deals, unauthorized discounts, things that are sort of outside of scope for the process or procedures set by the CFO, let's say, or set by the broader executive team. When we're closing the sale right before they become a customer, sometimes there's contract misrepresentations, backdated agreements. For those of you who have dealt with sales organizations in the capacity of your ethics and compliance job, share something in the chat right now on where you find most of the risks for your business, like where do they live and what kind of hacks have you found to de-risk this sales funnel thing. And then finally, incomplete due diligence from an onboarding perspective, missed compliance gates are all places that risk lives in this sort of sales operation. And so I think if you don't understand how the sales team is measured, it's really hard to understand why they take shortcuts and where they take shortcuts. So we spend a lot of time in ethics and compliance talking about incentives, right? All the compliance risk in our organization, all the risk that exists in our organization is really rooted down into some kind of human behavior in most cases, okay? It could be sort of humans acting in a broken system, of course, but I'm saying it's our understanding of the human, condition and what drives behavior is really critical. And of course, human beings respond to incentives. So if you show me how someone's paid, I can show you what steps they might make or what shortcuts they might take in order to solve for that outcome. So let's talk about how salespeople are paid. Okay, so you've heard some of these things before. Of course, many of them have a base salary, unless they're a 1099 and they only get paid commission, which has really kind of gone away. That was very popular in the past. A lot of those things have sort of gone away over time. Most have a fixed salary that gives, most salespeople have a fixed salary that gives them some stability. And then a large portion of their total earnings come from, hopefully, variable compensation, okay? Commission, some kind of percentage of the sales that they bring or the sales that they retain, okay? So this is some percentage of the deal value that they control. And this is what is meant to help drive the behavior. Most organizations want their salespeople selling more. Most organizations would say their salespeople are not selling enough. Okay, they want that revenue line to grow more. And so sales departments, growth teams are always kind of trying to tweak these incentive structures to elicit the behavior that should, hopefully, fingers crossed, lead to more revenue. You'll also see, so these top two lines are pretty basic. You'll also see other levers be pulled to kind of drive more marginal behavior that is in line with the goals of the organization. Things like accelerators. Maybe there's a new product coming out and there's an added commission on top of it. Maybe a certain product line is dying and they really want to push that. Maybe you have a bunch of inventory on the shelves in the warehouse that the CFO wants to get moved out. So they put some kind of an accelerator, some kind of an additional incentive to prompt those salespeople to bring those products to market and push those out into the market. SPIFs are short-term incentive bonuses, right? These are going to drive a very specific behavior. Maybe they want more prospecting. Maybe they want more, close sales, like I said, of a different product. And then management overrides. This is where a manager is getting some kind of, many times a sales manager is not on the front lines, right? Like they're directing a team. They are responsible for the quota attainment of several, people on the sales team. Those managers typically are going to get some kind of an override relative to the production of the people that they're responsible for. This can drive turning a blind eye or solving for their quota or keeping their job and all those kinds of things. So as you can see, there's all of these different layers of incentives, and all of these different layers of incentives create different risks, okay? So commission cliffs, okay? This is where maybe commissions are aggregated over a quarter. Sometimes you're going to see a commission cliff drive end of quarter stuffing or rushed deals. You can also see it on the other end. If someone's not going to hit their accelerator in a particular quarter, you can see a salesperson or a sales team take their foot off the gas. That can have kind of downstream effects to the rest of the business from a cash flow perspective or a profitability perspective or whatever, as they're saying, I'm going to save this deal for next quarter to increase my odds of hitting my accelerator in the following quarter. Incentivizing boundary pushing can come from these accelerators. It can prompt people to make claims that maybe don't exist if it's a new product or something like that, because they want to lock in that accelerator. So an accelerator is like maybe you have a base commission of, I don't know, 5% or something. And then once you hit a certain quota attainment, maybe that jumps to 7.5%, or maybe that jumps to 10%. These spiffs, these can create kind of tunnel vision. Like I said, sometimes you'll put a spiff on a particular moving, on an old car lot, on a used car lot. Maybe it's selling the old Chevy that they haven't been able to move for a while, or they're spiffs for, more demos or things like that. This can cause, Goodhart's effect really to take hold on a sales organization, where reps are kind of chasing bonuses and ignoring red flags because they're solving for that sort of short-term spiff attainment. Management overrides can often lead to reduced oversight motivation because there's again, it's a perverse incentive. A manager has an incentive to sort of turn a blind eye to get that sale in the door, to get that ink dried on the contract, so that sale will count for the quarter or whatever. Great question here. Let me just see here. I just popped up. Thank you for this, Joa. I've seen a lot of risk. The expo/networking setting that falls below the radar a bit. In such an environment, people tend to be a bit more relaxed, and sometimes conversations can begin to cross the line, such as collusion, side deals, sharing too much information, etc. That's a great point. That's not even something that I even brought into this. There's so much risk that lives in this sort of hunter function, right? These folks are out there. They're trying to bring in revenue for the organization. After a couple of cocktails or a couple of G&Ts, guys will start kind of sharing too much information, leading toward collusion, maybe crossing lines. So the sales organization, the growth organization, is replete for at least opportunities for violations, ethical violations, and a lot of risk can sort of live there. We're going to be getting to this later. Thanks for that comment. We're going to be getting to this later, a full case study on Wells Fargo. But again, this is a $3 billion total compliance failure cost coming from this famous Wells Fargo thing that happened. Okay, so every compliance failure can really be traced back to some kind of an incentive that was maybe misaligned, that drove the behavior that had these unintended consequences or these negative externalities. So if you can know the language of the sales department, understand some of the terminology, and really have a good understanding on what the incentive structure is that's in place, you can probably infer where many of the risks might come up. Okay, so look for those incentives. How are people compensated at the frontline level, right? On the individual contributor level, how are managers compensated? And you, with your brilliant risk brain, okay, your lens of risk, are going to be able to probably uncover where some of these risks might lie, so you can get out ahead of it. Again, our job in ethics and compliance, if we're ever going to elevate to this strategic lever in the organization, it means that what got us here isn't going to get us there, which means us being in reactive mode all the time is not going to be what's going to get us to the top of the mountain. We need to be proactive, and we need to be seeing around the curve, and we need to be able to anticipate by playing the expected value game. We need to be able to anticipate where these risks are going to come. So let's kind of pivot now. We talked a little bit about sales. We're up to 1,600 emojis. I love it. We talked a little bit about sales. Now let's talk a little bit about marketing, because again, these two groups are really all about trying to bring in more revenue to the top line. When the board or when the executive team takes out their P&L and they start looking at it, where do they go? They start at the top. Revenue is like the almighty, it's like the god of the financial statements. So there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of incentives, implicit and otherwise, to drive those numbers higher. And there are different incentive structures within each of these teams that end up creating different pools of risk that we should have our eye on given our industry and the incentive structures that are in place to anticipate where things might be going. So this go-to-market engine, the marketing engine, really presents a number of different compliance risks. Some of these are obviously probably super obvious to you, but we have FTC enforcement actions for advertising claims. There are risks around influencer marketing, depending on the industry that you're in, product claims. We have to be able to prove what we promise. Sometimes marketing gets a little fast and loose with claims that are being made, and there need to be controls in place, of course, as to not create not only brand risk, but maybe regulatory risk if we're making claims about our product that we're not able to actually live up to. Competitive intelligence, this can be a big risk. Back to this comment about collusion. Trade secret boundaries and ethical sourcing are critical things that we have to get right. And data collection. It feels sometimes like it's a little bit wild, wild west. The data laws or the privacy laws in our country are very complex. There's some, in many ways, they're kind of a state by state basis. And so there is a lot of AI out there that is scraping stuff, and your marketing team might be violating some of these rules or these regulations that are in place without you even knowing it. So you being able to speak the language and, again, understand how these folks are wired, understand what they're trying to solve for, can allow you to ask some smarter questions to these two critical groups to your organization to uncover some risk areas that you can maybe help with. Again, our goal here is not to slow the business down. Our goal is to make sure that the business can drive down the road of commerce faster, but just in a more safe way. So this is a real compliance frontier, is this digital marketing frontier. So cookie and consent tracking, email marketing, social media, where there's maybe brand safety obligations for content moderation, programmatic advertising. There's a lot of this going on in the industry right now. You might not have your finger on the marketing pulse. Your Twitter feed or your Instagram feed might not be just a bunch of marketing providers or software providers. There is a lot of automatic marketing that's happening right now that creates new risk, just like AI slop, from a compliance perspective, can cause you to push out maybe a policy that is not accurate. AI slop on the marketing side can cause you to make claims that are maybe not vetted. So those controls need to be in place. Again, we're trying to de-risk the business, not just from a regulatory perspective, but we want to have consistency of outcome with less sort of volatility of those outcomes. So we need to understand, look, we have the opportunity to touch all these different parts of the organization. And it takes us, the reason we're doing this whole course is we want to equip everybody with a better vocabulary so that we can apply our natural risk management pattern recognition to these other areas where a lot of the risk lives, okay? So we also have dark patterns, right? Deceptive UX is now a regulatory enforcement target. So there's all of these kind of whack-a-moles, all this kind of potential whack-a-mole that can be happening, all these different risks that can be popping up. And many times a marketing team, they're not solving for like low risk per se, they're solving for hitting their numbers, hitting their marketing qualified lead numbers, or their, opportunities created for salespeople or whatever. They're not always thinking first and foremost, is there anything being violated here? Okay. So when marketing can really create a liability is when all of this work that's gone into create the brand of your organization gets attacked by a marketing misstep. So brand promises can create legal obligations. What we claim we must deliver. Greenwashing enforcement is accelerating globally. We've seen this in the EU. We saw this a lot during the ESG era. All of these regulatory bodies are watching, SEC, FTC, things like that. DEI claims are continually being put under increased scrutiny. So again, if we're making claims publicly, this is the rule of thumb here, okay? This is the broad heuristic that should guide us. We shouldn't be making claims that we can't back up. If we can't back up a claim, or if marketing is spinning something to make something sound a little bit better than it is, we need to have a critical eye toward that, because the downstream effects of that can many times be extremely costly and extremely expensive. Your marketing team may be creating compliance exposure without realizing it. And if you're not dialed in to what's going on the marketing side, you might not even know the extent of that kind of exposure. Channel partners is another sort of engine or another lever that many organizations utilize in order to help drive that, top line on the P&L, that revenue line. And these can really be your biggest blind spot. The number of conversations I've had, I understand that it might be driven by the fact that we're launching a third-party risk management tool. But the number of conversations and the depth of the conversation we've had around this third-party issue would really blow your mind. So these indirect sales channels where somebody is selling your product, or the extent to which your organization is relying on outside parties to really drive your sales, that is something that you need to get a handle on and get an understanding on. How is that working? What proportion of the total revenue is coming from that? What proportion of total revenue are we expecting to come from that? If this is a new channel or a new mechanism that we're going to be relying on to drive our future sales goals, we need to understand kind of how that machine works a little bit, at least enough to be dangerous, so that we can ask those right questions and, again, help our organization see around the curve. So some of these indirect sales channels, you guys have all heard of these things, distributors who might end up reselling to sanctioned entities without your knowledge. Resellers can sometimes misrepresent your product in order to close their own deals. They're living in their own little bubble, right? So we need to make sure that they're at least adhering to our vendor code of conduct or our third-party code of conduct, right? Or they're at least they at least have the right amount of training so that they're not misrepresenting and sort of placing. We're kind of like giving our reputation in many ways to some of these indirect sales channel providers. Agents often can operate in high-risk jurisdictions with minimal oversight. A lot of organizations, when they're trying to expand internationally, will utilize local agents to tap that market or get a foothold in that market and so forth. And we've seen a lot of stories. I think Albemarle, when they got in trouble, they ended up rethinking their entire third-party apparatus and ended up bringing all that stuff in-house because for them, the risk was not worth the reward. And that sent a really great message and help to drive that record-breaking declination that they got. And so I'm not saying that that's what you have to do, but just recognize that there are, every opportunity has an equal and opposite, risk associated with it. And there's really no silver bullets in growing a business. And so anytime you want to utilize an agent or a referral partner, there's a different sort of clustering of incentives that we need to understand and a different set of risks that we're going to need to wrap our head around to, again, help make our business more resilient, help make our organizations more anti-fragile. An anti-fragile organization gets stronger as more volatility or more stress gets placed on it. When we're doing our job to the furthest extent possible, and we've brought people into this risk management apparatus that we are meant to create and cultivate and so forth, that's how we can start to achieve that anti-fragility, okay? So 90% of FCPA enforcement actions involve third-party intermediaries. I'm sure that that's already on your radar, but being able to manage the risk of our channel partners is something that needs to be front and center if that is a relatively significant proportion of our total revenue. If our organization is leveraging third parties a lot, or we're planning to as we're stepping into a new market, we need to be able to have these things dialed in, due diligence, make sure that our contract requirements have the appropriate clauses, anti-bribery representations and so forth. We want to make sure that we're monitoring or somebody is monitoring, right? Like we don't want people asleep at the switch. There's a lot of room for bribery. There's a lot of room for FCPA violations with third parties. Having these audit rights in place and also taking advantage of them. I think we had somebody on in a recent episode and we were talking about audit rights. Don't fight for audit rights if you're not going to take advantage of them. But if you have them, you should be taking advantage of them, even on a cursory basis, even just a sampling across these third parties, just to make sure things are in order. I guarantee you start looking under rocks, you're going to start to find worms, okay? Termination provisions. Ideally, you're going to be able to get a termination provision from one of these third parties if necessary, so you're not handcuffed, so you don't have like an albatross around your neck. So now let's kind of dive into the customer life cycle, because these compliance touch points exist at every single stage. And again, the more we can embed ourselves in the business, the more we can understand how this machine of all these processes and departments and people pursuing their own individual OKRs and their own individual goals in pursuit of this organization's mission and in pursuit of the organization's, means by which they're generating value for the investors, the better we can understand how those gears mesh, the more likely we are to direct our efforts towards the things, the risk hotspots, the things that are actually going to move the needle from an impact perspective. So as we're looking through, again, back to the pipeline, think about the customer life cycle as a compliance map. So in prospecting, we need to have dialed in truthful outreach. We need to make sure that our data privacy, data privacy regulations are being followed, that the do not call lists are being adhered to. At the proposal stage, how have you validated that representations made by salespeople are accurate? Are you waiting for something downstream or, enough rattling from the implementation team or the customer, the client success team to indicate? Or are you able to kind of see in real time if these representations are accurate or not? At the negotiation stage, what kind of anti-corruption provisions and fair dealing requirements are embedded in the minds of the salespeople? Do they understand the importance of these things as they're going through the negotiation process? Are these clauses in your contracts that they know can't be moved? Okay. On the onboarding side, again, this is a broad conversation across a bunch of different industries here, but know your customer verifications, sanction screening risk assessments for third parties or for vendors or for customers. If those things need to be in place, what is the hit rate on those? Not only in terms of like how many red flags are coming out of it, but what is the coverage of these processes? Are they being applied consistently across the board? We've heard throughout this year, I can just think of a couple of things off the top of my head where somebody had a process in place, but it wasn't being followed, and then a fine came up. I think this was on a Matt Kelly episode. But many times we have these controls in place, we have these systems in place, and we're not sort of testing, we're not watching the watchers. We're not testing the extent to which these processes are being followed. So as part of our annual risk assessment, at least at a minimum, even better if you're having conversations with the salespeople to really kind of take their temperature and see the extent to which they find the things that you find important in their own business, and give you some indications on where there might be some leaks in the hull of the ship. And then finally, on renewals, are there updated due diligence requirements? Are there, rescreens being done? Are there questionnaires being, sent back out for folks? Is there honest dealing? Can you say that with confidence? So where we see deals go wrong at these various different stages is sometimes we see reps who have a spiff, or maybe they have an accelerator, or maybe they just have good old fashioned management pressure from their manager to go and reach out to folks. Sometimes they're scraping data without consent. Sometimes they're leveraging an AI tool that's getting information that might be violating a regulation in your industry. On the prospecting side, over-promising capabilities to win the deal, that happens a lot, okay? New car salesmen have that reputation for a reason, okay? Sometimes they're selling a lemon and they're putting a little bit of sawdust in the engine so you don't hear it knocking underneath the hood. Are they offering free consulting fees that end up masking improper payments? Again, there's a lot of stuff moving around. There's a lot of incentives in place. There's a lot of pressures in place on a sales team. I was talking to a friend who runs a big sales team at a cybersecurity company, and he was just talking about, what the nature of it is. This is a quarter by quarter job, regardless of whether you've been here for 10 years or you've been there for 2 years. It's a quarter by quarter job. You have to keep your job constantly, and that's really the reality for a lot of people in the sales department. So again, think of that pressure, how different that might be for somebody who's maybe more on the operations side or more on the administrative side, where there's not that daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly pressure to hit a certain number. Again, people, when they're a caged animal and they have those kinds of pressures, it's easy for folks, particularly salespeople, by the way, to start cutting corners, okay? Renewals, bundling products to force purchases. Okay, these are these tying arrangements. So we need to have some kind of visibility into that. So we're getting right now into this case study. I'm going to slow down a little bit because I need to take a breath. Okay, so we're gonna talk now. We really did a lot of research on this Wells Fargo thing to really incorporate some of these things. I know everyone has heard about this Wells Fargo thing. I alluded to it earlier. It's a very famous case where this revenue engine created a ton of risk for the organization. So we're going to walk through this thing in detail now and talk about this cross-selling scandal. And I want to really kind of pick apart the big driving force with this Wells Fargo thing was the incentive structures and how these incentive structures were pushed down really to the front lines of the organization, and how those created a wild degree of compliance risks at scale across the entire company. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the timeline of this failure, okay? So we had they had aggressive cross-sell quotas, okay? There was a mantra that became almost a bumper sticker in the organization called 8 is great. This became the mantra. Employees were driven to open 3.5 million fake accounts. This was if somebody did the back of the envelope math, they would see that this was the only way that it was going to be possible to meet the projections or meet the commitment, quote unquote, that Wells Fargo was making to Wall Street. The only way for them to hit these wild numbers to indicate that they were continuing to grow was to create these fake accounts. There were many internal reports. These internal reports were ignored, okay? Management dismissed these early warning signs. Whistleblowers were retaliated against, okay? The system ended up punishing these truth tellers. Regulators ended up discovering a pattern, okay? What was hidden ended up becoming public, and there was over $3 billion of fines, and the CEO was ousted. Okay, so that's kind of the long and short of it. Let's go ahead and do a root cause analysis on the Wells Fargo situation here, okay? Oops, sorry. Okay. So compensation structure rewarded volume over quality. Okay. So this allows us to go deeper and see why this really happened. It didn't matter whether an account was real or used, only that it existed. So again, people are going to solve, you put a metric out there, you put an incentive out there, people are going to solve for that metric. We just saw this recently with the AI thing. I don't know if you guys read these articles, but some of these organizations, I think Uber was one, they had these leaderboards in place based on AI token usage. The thought being, hey, if guys are using a lot of tokens, then that's an indication that they're adopting AI, and we as an organization are going to start to get the benefit of these efficiency gains. Well, people were just solving for that metric. They said, okay, cool. I need to just burn through a bunch of tokens. So they're using it to write emails. They're using it to check the weather in some cases. And that incentive was not a perfect correlate with the outcomes, the profitability, the efficiency gains that they were expecting. Same thing here, right? They were just solving for the creation of these accounts, not the extent to which the accounts were used or were these real. Okay. Management was also incentivized to not look too closely. So management was incentivized to really hit these metrics. Why? Well, their overrides depended on their team hitting these volume numbers. Okay. So like up and down the whole chain, the incentive structure was perfectly designed for the outcome they ended up getting. And in retrospect, it was very easy to see, we're doing a case study years later now. It was very easy to see, well, like, yeah, of course, managers are going to overlook it because they were kind of compensated the same way. What incentive does a manager have whose overrides are tied to the creation of this new volume, phantom or otherwise, to validate whether these accounts are being used or not? The short answer is they didn't. Compliance, this is maybe the biggest travesty of this whole thing, is that compliance had the data, but they were really silenced. They didn't have the authority to act. So that's an extremely frustrating reality in the Wells Fargo situation. And ultimately, the culture that this incentive structure created really prioritized revenue metrics over ethical conduct. So I, of course, believe Wells Fargo had a really probably pretty code of conduct. They probably paid a bunch of money for that code of conduct. And they probably had a bunch of glossy images. And they probably had a bunch of really interesting links to a bunch of other policies. Remember, though, that those things are only animating if they actually are animating. Those things only matter the extent to which that actually drives behavior in the organization. And if there are competing incentives that fly in the face of those things, guess what's going to win out? The almighty dollar is going to win out. Someone's self-enrichment is always going to win out over an aspirational ideal that is espoused by the Ethics and Compliance Committee. So again, or the Ethics and Compliance Department. So again, it's critical that we understand the existence of these incentives that are out there, because those incentives end up driving the behavior. And if we're blind to those things, then we're never going to be able to get out ahead of it. So the compliance team had the reports. They just couldn't get anyone to listen, because the strong force there was really the culture. The culture went out over it. So let's kind of talk about designing compliant incentives. We don't just want to audit. We want to help design, and we want to drive our knowledge, our expertise in human behavior, and the wiring of human behavior into those conversations, so that we can help the organization, avoid kind of careening off the cliff into a ditch. Okay. So when we're talking, so here are some great principles for compliant incentive structures. We want to be able to balance revenue metrics with quality metrics. Okay. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into the Wells Fargo thing in a minute, but I just want to give you a little kind of a glance at it. Balancing those revenue metrics with quality metrics helps to ensure that we're not creating fake accounts that are really just kind of end up being a vanity metric that end up causing downstream problems or problems down the road. If you can, include some compliance gates, not just, the ethics and compliance department gates, but gates around the adherence to the standards. So if maybe there's certain contract terms that your legal department wants to ensure that exist across your various different interactions with clients. Well, perhaps having an incentive structure at the individual sales rep level that scales up and down the extent to which they're able to adhere to those standards, that can do a lot to drive those behaviors. And again, de-risk the commitments and the obligations that your organization is making as inked on that contract that you are a party to. Capping accelerators, there's kind of debate around this, but capping accelerators to prevent desperation-driven behavior, having maybe accelerators that are tied to a trailing period of time number as opposed to those cliffs, that can do a lot to curtail the kind of channel stuffing or the opposite of which, maybe somebody kicking deals into the next quarter. So, asking a salesperson, how might you game this, or putting your salesperson hat on, or dropping the incentive structure into your AI of choice and saying, how might a salesperson game this? If you don't really have that kind of gaming the system muscle that you've developed in years of skipping lines and cutting corners, then you can probably get some good visibility and get some good ideas on how, where. Like, there's no perfect incentive structure, okay? So where are people likely who are wired different, who have a different level of conscientiousness or a different level of risk aversion? How might they sort of push the needle and exhibit behaviors that are kind of contrary to the spirit of the incentive structure that's in place? There's a lot of tools out there like that. How about clawback provisions for deals that unravel? So some organizations, they have clawback provisions that trail for an entire year. Others never even open up that conversation with their salespeople, which then again creates an implicit incentive for those folks to cut those corners. And who cares if the client ends up getting implemented? I got my commission. I can move on to the next one. What are the behaviors that we're trying to, that we want to ensure that our sales team is exhibiting? And does our incentive structure align with those behaviors, or are there gaps in it that allow people to, cut those corners and, walk around those lines in the sand? Great question from Doug. Hey, Doug, what are your thoughts regarding company obligations / good practices regarding influencers? They are compensated by tech companies by click volume. They also receive money from the brands they are promoting. Should this trigger monitoring or oversight? I mean, my first answer is always like the materiality answer. How big of a spend of it is it? How much material time is your organization spending on it, and how much revenue is coming from it? If it's a drop in the bucket, it's probably not really worth your effort. If it's a major sales strategy, we need to be able to understand the mechanisms of that sort of influencer marketing to a greater degree. To what extent are they using click farms in Asia to drive those clicks? Are these really validated things? Do we have controls in place in that incentive structure to tie what we're paying them, not just to views or clicks, but rather to actual closed sales, right? The closer we can get to closed sales, the higher up we can go on the P&L as the mechanism to give somebody, some kind of a commission, the better. That's usually where there's a lower risk. If we're doing something off the P&L, clicks, views, whatever, that opens up for risk. If we're tying it to something lower on the P&L, profitability or something like that, that just leaves a lot more gray area. So that's my quick kind of off the cuff answer to that. Thanks for that question, Doug. Okay, so we want to try to make ethics a measurable component of our performance reviews. There's bonus points for that. Okay, so asking this question, here's a great little checklist. So a sales comp checklist. So there are 5 things to kind of think about. Is there a public test? Are there guardrails in place? Is there a compliance gate? Are there override controls? And are there clawbacks? So a public test is, does the plan incentivize behavior the company would be proud to explain publicly? Guardrails. Are there caps to prevent extreme behavior, whether it's at the end of a quarter or something like that? Are there at least flags coming up if there's an extreme payout for something? Compliance gate. Is there a compliance sign-off as a prerequisite for compensation? Is that tied to compliant contracts? Is that tied to somebody, some third party, whether it's the CFO or whatever, to sign off on the commission? That's just like a basic sort of control that's in place. Override controls. Can management override compliance flags? If so, who does that approval? Is it somebody within the organization, or is it somebody on a neutral team? And then finally, are there clawback provisions for non-compliant deals? Expand in your mind what a non-compliant deal is. That's a deal that doesn't end up that doesn't end up sort of sticking. That's not revenue that your organization is able to get in the long run due to some kind of misrepresentation or something like that. So how do we move from this department of no to becoming a trusted advisor? I think reviewing compensation plans proactively, getting an understanding of how those compensation plans are work, how those incentives actually drive those behaviors, and the extent to which people are actually meeting these quotas and these accelerators and things like that. That's going to give you a great place to launch from. Suggesting modifications that protect revenue and reduce risk. Again, framing this as something that everybody cares about, which is more revenue, which is more profitability, which is more enterprise value, while reducing risk, is the best way way to get what you need in terms of like a risk mitigation perspective. We had a whole episode, and we'll be on in session 6, we'll be talking about influence to a greater degree. But we have to understand, we have to connect with these organizations, these other departments. We have to understand kind of how these machines work, and we have to make sure that we're framing what we want in ways that kind of resonate with them. Otherwise, we're just relying on our positional authority, which really isn't really worth that much, okay? Being able to quantify the risk reduction that your recommendation delivers. If you need help with that, AI can help you. I'm happy to help you. You can always quantify something. You just have to be able to lean into some basic assumptions and be able to like present those assumptions. But being able to quantify the risk, again, move something from something ethereal and something sort of subjective to something that's more objective and sort of brings it down to earth so people can see what the impact is going to be. And finally, position compliance as a competitive advantage. We should never be viewed as a tax to the business, okay? We want to be able to enhance the business. For us to be that strategic lever, we need to always be closing, ABC, okay? This is something to learn, ABC, always be closing, always be complying, okay? Always be framing out compliance as a tailwind to the business, as that spoiler on the car, not as something that's really dragging it down, not sandbags on the hot air balloon that is your organization. So how do you become the type of compliance person that the sales team wants to talk to? Well, I think you need to learn their metrics, go back over the things that we talked about. Also, and ask a lot of questions, okay? Attending their sales kickoffs and things like that, letting them see that you're a human being first and foremost, not a stick in the mud or a square. Show up where they work and be a part of those things. It's going to give you a lot of insights, and it's going to pave the way for a lot of influence that you're going to want to take advantage of down the road. Provide fast, practical guidance, understanding what they're wired by, understanding their incentives. If it's at the end of the quarter and they're trying to push something through, even being able to speak to that and say, hey, I understand that it's the end of the quarter. What can we do to kind of de-risk this deal, which is really kind of coming in well past beyond what we agreed to? Being able to like understand where they're coming from and being able to convey that does a lot to enhance your reputation and your level of impact with them. Okay, celebrate compliant wins. Being able to call out salespeople that have gone out of their way to not cut the corners, which maybe some of their peers are doing. Remember that incentives can be dollars, of course. Compensation can be dollars, gift cards, things like that. But compensation and incentives can also be just calling somebody's name out and giving them that sort of public recognition, which salespeople love, by the way, okay? And being available when they need answers in real time, the faster you can, the more you can develop a reputation of being fast and being like aligned with them and rowing in the same direction, trying to build that top line of the organization, the better you're going to align with them. The better you're going to ingratiate with them, and the better you're going to be able to demonstrate that you are wearing the same jersey as everybody else on the sales team. Okay, these are 5 great questions that you can ask your sales VP. I'd like to encourage you as your homework to, in the next week or before our next Ethicsverse MBA session, go to your sales VP and have this kind of a conversation with them. Just kind of pick their brain a little bit. Salespeople love to talk, most of them, okay? So asking them things like this: what is the hardest part of your job? Where do you find deals get stuck? What are your biggest frustrations with deals getting stuck? What ends up holding them up? Frame it this way. I really want to make sure that I am a tailwind, I'm a lubricant to the sales engine that you're running. Of course, there's things that I need to solve for as a compliance officer, but I never want to hold you up. I never want to be the reason that your team doesn't hit quota or you personally don't hit your override accelerators. So I just want to kind of understand your operation a little bit more to make sure that there's not any like hotspots or sticking points on my operation as we inevitably interact. What a frame to the conversation. You think they're not going to take that call? Of course they are. What do customers push back on? What terms do we demand that are maybe unrealistic, that maybe aren't market anymore? Is there another way that like we can solve those things so that we get the protection for our organization we want while clearing out some of the underbrush so you can run down that path a little bit faster? How is your team compensated? What are their biggest frustrations? If you were to reinvent your compensation structure, what changes might you make to that? What are some of the unintended consequences that you've seen come out of this compensation structure? Just having a person-to-person interaction, not with the single light in the interrogation room in the phone book on the table. We want to just have like a normal conversation with these folks because they're closer to it, and we're all wired to like uncover risk. Okay. Where do you see compliance helping? Where do you see us hurting? Having those kind of collaborative conversations really can do a lot, okay? So let's talk a little bit about some of these things, these 10 patterns that should trigger your review, okay? Where are the hot spots from a risk perspective? These are the commercial compliance detection guide, okay? So we have 10 hot spots. I'm gonna give you 6. I'm gonna change the slide. I'm gonna give you 4 more because I love you. 10 patterns that should trigger review. So the first one is like last day deals, okay? These are many times large deals that are happening on the last day of the quarter. What concessions did we have to make in order to get that deal in on the last day of the quarter or the last day of the year? What compliance overrides are in place? If there are compliance overrides, you should be able to get a list of those very quickly from whoever did that override. Hopefully it's a third party, a neutral third party inside the organization. If it's the manager and they have that kind of power, you should be able to understand, and those should be documented somewhere. Partner commissions, channel partner commissions that are above the market rate, that should be a red flag for you. Misrepresentations, do you even have a way to see the extent to which misrepresentations have been made in the sales process? Is there an order form attached to it? Is there marketing materials that is referenced as the basis for this particular sale? Have those things been vetted? Has somebody signed off on those things? High risk jurisdictions, where are these sales coming from? If there are sales that are coming through an agent in a jurisdiction where you have no real interaction, and that's a material number for your organization or in your expansion plans, this should trigger some kind of a review. Revenue concentration, so if there's a dangerous dependence on a single account or a single customer, those are places where a lot of risk can end up living. Generous terms, these are usually favorable discounts. These are usually sort of correlate to the end of a quarter or somebody being close to hitting their own accelerators or their own spiffs. Without visibility into how those spiffs work, or without visibility into how a salesperson might get their accelerator, which sometimes can be a 50% higher commission rate than what they normally get, these things are going to end up flying under the radar, and it's going to end up creating downstream effects. Again, what's the whole point of the Ethicsverse MBA? For us to move from reactive to proactive. Well, if we can uncover these, if we're not doing these kinds of things, well, all we're doing is crossing our fingers and hoping that the stack of newspapers doesn't turn into a fire in the basement. These are creating, this is like fodder for more risks down the road that we want to get out ahead of if we're going to move to that strategic advisor, that proactive side of the fence. Third-party payments, these are payments to parties with no clear service or deliverable. That's where a lot of bribes, by another term, can kind of live. Side letters, like verbal agreements and side letters that contradict the main contract. Are these addenda? Is there an addendum attached that maybe overrides the contract? Is that even on your team or the legal team's radar? And then this is an easy one if you're tracking these things, entertainment expenses. Listen, sometimes you got to pay a bunch of entertainment expenses in order to get deals done. But there's a lot of risk that can live there. Okay, so we gave kind of a high-level overview of the Wells Fargo thing. In the last 10 minutes here, I want to dive a lot deeper into it because I think there's a lot of things that we can uncover to a greater degree. Okay, so we had America's most admired bank. It was Warren Buffett's largest holding. Their strategy to grow the business was cross-selling. The average household held fewer than 3 of their products, and Wells Fargo customers averaged about 6. So the slogan, 8 is great, which we alluded to earlier, was really about, cool, let's get all these guys up to having 8 of our products, okay? So 8 products per customer. They picked it, why? Because it rhymed. Never let a good rhyme go to waste, okay? 8 is great was the target because it rhymed and it was something higher. I would have said 9 is fine, just kidding. The reward was Wall Street prized the cross-sell ratio. So the premium on their stock price, which was driven by the conversations that were had during earnings reports about, what's coming next quarter, our earnings projections and so forth. The street was really keyed in on this cross-sell metric. So they wanted to continue to push this cross-sell metric higher and higher to drive their stock price higher. So that's kind of the lay of the land. This is kind of what the situation was when this thing was birthed out of, grew out really out of Wells Fargo. So how was the pressure built? Remember, human beings respond to incentives. So what was the machine that was driving the behavior? You can always trace any bad behavior. Any violations can usually be traced either back to a broken system or a broken incentive. Sometimes the system is the incentive, okay? So they had daily quotas at the branch level, solutions, targets cascaded down to individual tellers and bankers, also often 8 to 20 products per day. So imagine being a teller, you got to sell 20 new products per day. You think you're not pushing that constantly if your whole job is tied to achieving that 20 or that 8 or whatever it is. Sales tracking reports run and reviewed multiple times throughout the day. So there was a constant pressure, right? Branches called in their numbers to district managers every day, multiple times throughout the day. Banks, branches were giving, this information up to their branch managers. So again, from the 8 is great at the CEO pushing all the way down throughout the organization, there was constant pressure at every single level to achieve this cross-sell ratio that Wall Street was really keyed in on. Bonuses, promotions, recognition were tied to how many solutions people sold. And the stick was that if you missed your numbers, there would be a coaching plan, a formal warning, or you'd get terminated. So staying late unpaid to call the family and friends list is what ended up resulting from this. So again, you can feel, I'm just kind of describing something. You can feel what that pressure must have been like inside the organization. The constant whip cracking over your head to sell more of these products. Call your friends, call your cousins, things like that. Branch and district managers earned incentives on their team's volume, and the people meant to supervise profited. So again, there was like perverse incentives up and down the whole chain. They were incentivized to not look into those deals. All you had to do is create those things. Okay, so what were the workarounds that were in place that allowed these impossible targets to be hit? So we had gaming, we had simulated funding, we had sandbagging, we had the scale, and we had bundling. Okay, so pinning, this is like issuing unauthorized debit cards and setting the pin often to 4 zeros without the customer knowing. So for a debit card to be valid, there had to be a pin. They would pin it by just giving it four zeros. Boom, check. Check. Box checked, okay? That counts for one of my products for the day. Simulated funding, so moving a customer's own money between accounts to make the new accounts look funded, that was being done at scale. Sandbagging, this was like holding accounts open for the next period. Delaying account openings to the next reporting period in order to smooth the quota performance. This is that sort of that undue pressure that a line in the sand for a given date ends up driving the behaviors to the extent somebody is compensated or they have incentives around those performance across those different periods. So the scale was roughly 3.5 million potentially unauthorized accounts and about 565,000 credit cards were created. That is a crazy scale, okay? That is a crazy scale of fake things that were created as a result of these incentives, but it's a garbage in, garbage out thing. If the system is meant or allowed to sort of generate garbage, well, guess what? Garbage is going to come out of it. So bundling also was another one. So listen, I understand that you might not be in the banking industry, but there's some semblance, there's some things, there's some incentive, like there's only so many incentives, right? Like there's carrots and there's sticks, and there's obviously many different types of sticks and many different types of carrots, but like they all kind of boil down to the same thing. And the way that Wells Fargo was able to create this massive issue stemmed from, and again, in retrospect, it's so clear, as are many things in life, stemmed from these pressures that were put in place and these incentives that, in the environment that these incentives created. Okay. So let's walk through the early warning signs, and this should be a cautionary tale to any of us in any organization, because guess what? If you think things happen only to the other guy, you're the other guy to everybody else in the world, okay? So it might happen to you. Okay, so in 2004, an internal investigator warned that incentive plans were driving gaming, and they recommended reform. Nothing changed. Okay, this is all kind of coming down to the short-termism. Are we just solving for the next quarter earnings so that executives can get their options vested and get their bonus, or are we thinking about the long term of the organization? There's always that kind of conflict. There's always that conflict in your own life. There's always that conflict in a business. And when that short-termism ends up winning out, it allows for a massive mess. Like I'm sure when the guy said 8 is great, he was like patting himself on the back. He's like, ha, I'm so smart. He wasn't thinking about the $3 billion fallout that came as a result of it. Okay. From 2007 to 2013, the ethics hotline complaints and HR cases about fake accounts climbed year after year. So it's not like nobody saw this. Nobody knew this was going on. It's not like there were no canaries in the coal mine. The board is notified of rising sales integrity terminations, and they treated this as employee conduct issue, not a systems issue. So listen, we didn't even talk about board incentives. I don't know what the board incentives were. Presumably there were some incentives at play here for them to turn a blind eye to something which is very obvious. You would imagine that the folks that make it up to the board, they've seen it all before. They know what they're doing. They're wise, and they're these sages. It's not that hard. Again, maybe it's just the benefit of retrospect. It's not that hard to infer what might come of rising sales integrity terminations. There was some kind of a decision made to say, oh, these are just employee conduct issues. In 2013, the LA Times published a detailed expose on the pressure cooker culture 3 years before the enforcement. Okay, so and then in 2015. LA city attorneys sue. The bank still frames the problem as a few bad employees. Listen, at that point, I'm not sort of, I'm just kind of calling balls and strikes here. People are going to say whatever they're going to say when they're, in the midst of a lawsuit. I can't imagine that they actually thought that it was just a few bad apples. They could anybody with, a triple digit IQ could kind of infer how this pressure cooker culture and how these incentives might lead to these bad outcomes that they ended up getting in trouble for. So let's talk about the people who spoke up. The pattern was employees who called the ethics line about these fake accounts were disproportionately fired shortly afterward. It's critical that, all this stuff is related. Everything is everything. All this stuff is related. If you have a mechanism to make sure that people that are speaking up are not being retaliated against by following up with people after the fact or having some kind of a view into the HR firing feed, and you can reference that up against, even if it's just on a quarterly basis, reference that up against people that have been identified in reports, you might uncover something systemic that could lead to a massive explosion down the road, okay? There was a blacklist. Defamatory U5 filings followed some people out the door, essentially ending their banking careers. What kind of an incentive does that create from a speak up culture perspective? Listen, Wells Fargo had a bunch of human beings. All those human beings probably went through compliance training. They probably read the code of conduct. They probably saw and felt in their gut that some of these things are probably wrong, or these feel at least in a gray zone, if not, from a black and white perspective, totally on the wrong side of the line. People are, though, going to solve, think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're solving for air and food first, okay? You're solving for your job and your kind of stability first, and that causes people to shut up and not report things. In 2017, OSHA ordered a fired manager reinstated with a $5.4 million back pay. This is one of the largest whistleblower awards in history, and the lesson was the system didn't just ignore these truth tellers, it actually punished them. So, of course, it was allowed to perpetuate. If anybody who spoke up ran the risk of getting a U5 filing and then not being able to exist in that career anymore, of course they're going to be quiet. I guess I'm already at an hour, so I'm going to run a couple more minutes. If you have to go, catch the last 5 minutes on the YouTube channel. Okay, so here was the reckoning, and from 2016 to 2023, this is when the reckoning happened. So there was $185 million in fines in 2016. The CEO stepped down in October of 2016 after a brutal Senate hearing. In 2017, the board clawed back $180 million of an executive compensation. Think about that number. $180 million was clawed back from the retail chief and from the CEO. In February of the next year, the Federal Reserve imposed an unprecedented asset cap, and the bank is legally barred from growing. So the Fed said, "Okay, guess what? You're not growing anymore. You can't even grow your assets until you get your house in order." DOJ SEC settlement was $3 billion in 2020. 2 years later, Stumpf was personally fined $17 million and banned from banking for life. He got it. He created the circumstances, okay? If a fish thinks, it stinks from the head. So hopefully he's not on this webinar. Well, if he is, you should have said something, pal. 8 ain't great. How's that? And then finally, 2023, Stolstad pled guilty to obstructing a bank examination, which resulted in criminal liability. So there were 5 failure points, one for every single framework. So the comp design was bad. The management overrides created more of this kind of a culture. Compliance authority gap was clearly present, right? Compliance was hearing about stuff. They were hitting the glass ceiling, or they were kind of put into, the bottom of a well. Nobody wanted to hear about it. HR saw this data for decades, could not stop this Wells Fargo machine. This was like one of the root causes. The culture of run it like you own it became hit the number or you lose your job. So the ideal was run it like you own it, act like an owner. Instead, there was a more urgent, let's say, incentive, or a more urgent motto, which was the number is the number, hit it or you lose your job. So that affected the mindset. So we talked about the incentive structures, the incentive layers. We talked about this sort of culture layer, and then this mindset, the day-to-day mindset that people were kind of showing up and driving their day-to-day actions. Sell 8 today, sell 20 today, report at midday, at lunch to the district manager. And then the board oversight, there was a total failure on the governance side. So the board saw these terminations rising and saw no systemic questions. So the common thread here is that every single failure point was visible in the incentive map years before the first fine. Okay, so years before the first fine ended up happening, you could see the behaviors, you could see the circumstances that ended up allowing those things to take place. So this week's exercise, You have double homework, okay? So the one is to have that conversation with your VP of sales, or even just a salesperson, okay? The other thing is I want you to bring it home and ask these 4 questions about your organization. So where does a motivator report exist in your organization? Is there a metric that's tracked so intensely that people would cut corners to move it? A lot of that lives in sales, okay? There's a lot of, a lot of sales departments are chop shops. A lot of sales, there's a lot of turnover on sales teams in general, okay? Who in your organization can override a compliance flag? Who approves the overrides? Are those all kind of contained, like in the Wells Fargo thing? Are they all contained within the sales organization, or is there a neutral third party that approval needs to get granted from, by a salesperson or by a sales manager? If an employee calls your hotline about their own manager's numbers, what would realistically happen to them? Do you even have mechanisms in place to ensure that the retaliation that they're probably assuming that they're going to have to face is not happening? Have you doubled down on your retaliation, program, your anti-retaliation program? Are you doing constant messaging to make sure that these people that may exist inside your organization with critical risk intelligence feel comfortable and feel protected enough to share that with you, a well-intended, quasi-independent party inside the organization that's fighting for the integrity of the business? And what are your equivalent to the 2004 memo? The warning that existed in a file somewhere right now, waiting to be Exhibit A in some kind of a lawsuit. So nobody in Wells Fargo, even the CEO, probably didn't say, let's commit fraud today. They weren't doing that. They were solving for their own incentives. And, unfortunately, and this is maybe a whole nother episode, unfortunately, Wall Street in general has a broad incentive structure to hit these quarterly numbers. That's an incentive to have this short-termism. That's an incentive to put these kinds of things in place that correspond to how the CEO or how the board or how executive leadership ends up getting their own compensation. So guess what? That's the world that we're living in. Our job is to de-risk our organizations in spite of it. Our job is to learn from these lessons, these cautionary tales, and see which of these things might be going on in our organization. Bring that scientific mind, form a hypothesis, and try to falsify, try to falsify it in a scientific way to increase the risk that you're reducing the volatility in your organization, okay? So the comp plan is what ended up kind of committing this fraud. So I want to talk a little bit about our mindset shift, and we're going to be wrapping up here in 2 seconds, okay, I swear. The mindset shift is that the sales team is the enemy. They cut corners. All they do is spend money. All they do is go out to eat. Nobody does their paperwork. We need to shift that into the sales team is my early warning system, and they can be my early warning system if I know how to listen and I'm creating the circumstances for me to listen. If I can do some discovery with that sales team and really kind of understand how that machine works, I'm going to be much more inclined to find risk areas that are maybe generating unintended consequences that have not sort of sprung up yet. The best compliance officers don't build walls around the sales team. They build bridges and then they monitor the traffic. If there's one thing that you take away from today, it's that. It's that you have a great team that has a lot of pressure on them. They have a lot of pressure just in the job itself. They probably have tremendous amount of pressure from the organization. They're the train of horses pulling the cart forward. If we can exhibit a little of our natural empathy and we can step into their shoes, we're much more likely to understand, to get some clarity about what the realities are in that, what might be a pressure cooker. And we're much more likely to get into that proactive mode. That's what this whole thing is about. Getting into to proactive mode means we have to crack the hood. We have to hear how the engine is running. That kind of takes, to be able to have an ear for an engine means you have to kind of understand how an engine works. So your exercise, talk to your sales VP, ask them for 30 minutes of their time. That's nothing for a salesperson, okay? They should all be working late regardless. Ask those 5 questions from the session, and I want you to listen more than you talk. Imagine me saying that. Listen more than you talk, and then I'll come to session 5 with some insights. I guarantee that conversation is not going to be a waste of your time. You're either going to build a connection with somebody, you're going to be able to reframe yourself to the sales department where a lot of your risk lives, and you're likely going to be able to see something that you're going to be able to help with. It's not coming in with a hammer and smashing down their incentive structure, but maybe there's a tweak to something on the edge of it that's a pain point for that sales manager that you're talking about. So you should be the expert of behavioral science in your organization. Your organization, like every department in your organization, should be able to get some of that behavioral science expertise so that you can help them. Everyone's fighting the same battle, right? Like anybody who's in management, they have a bunch of people that they're trying to get get to do a certain job. We have a lot of insights because we are behavioral, in ethics and compliance, we are behavioral science experts. We know how human beings work. We know how to kind of tweak those dials to drive those right behaviors. We can usually help from an impartial perspective. We can usually help somebody else consider something that maybe they haven't. And you know what? If nothing else, we have beginner's eyes, okay? When you're having that first conversation with the VP of sales, you're going to be bringing a fresh perspective to it. You just are. So quick wins always emerge when you understand other folks' pain points. So your key takeaways: the sales floor is where compliance risk is often manufactured. When you can understand their incentives, you can understand the risks and what risks might be coming down the road. You're going to increase the odds that you're able to see around the curve for your organization. If you regulate sales without understanding how they're compensated, you're always going to be seen as the enemy. We are all wearing the same jersey, okay? We all have the same URL in our email address. We all get paid by the same organization. We don't want to have this otherism creep into our organization, particularly for us, where we're the circulatory system of the organization in many cases. Us being viewed as the other ends up cutting off the thing that we need, our own lifeblood, the thing that we need to do our job, which is intelligence about points of risk in the organization. The sales team is not your adversary. Yes, they're wired a little bit differently. Yes, they drink too much, okay? But they're your early warning signal if you know how to listen. So next time we are talking about the machine behind the brand, okay? We're going through all these areas of a business. Next time we're talking about operations, supply chain, and technology. Your business is not just finance and it's not just sales. There's a whole group, there's several groups of people that actually do the things that your business is supposed to do. So we're going to be diving into that. July 23rd. So we have another one this Thursday. We have Ethicsverse this Thursday talking about algorithmic risk. July 23rd, invite a friend, invite your neighbor, put some posters up on in your neighborhood, on Facebook, put it up on LinkedIn, and we're going to blow the doors off of a phenomenal Ethicsverse day. Love you all. Sorry I ran long. Not really that sorry. See you on YouTube. See you next Thursday. Take it easy.